Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our study of the book of Origins, Genesis. I'm John Walker, and I and several others are virtually here with our minister, Bruce Watzik, the minister of the Princeton Church of Christ. Bruce, where are we in the story as it pertains to Joseph, his narrative within the Genesis story?
Well, we're kind of at the beginning of the Joseph story. We've kind of gone through the downward spiral of tragic events in the life of Joseph that have served as a severe test of his character. He starts off with his mother dying at the birth of his younger brother, so he's a motherless child after that point. Although he's the father's favorite, that backfires. His brothers hate him. The only debate the brothers had was, are we going to kill him or sell him into slavery? There were no third options. And so he was sold into slavery. And of course, we read that he had gotten to Egypt and was a slave in the household of a significant official for Pharaoh, Potiphar. And then, even though his work was outstanding, he was put in charge of everything for Potiphar. Potiphar's wife was a corrupt woman trying to seduce him, and then was bitterly charged him with trying to rape her when he wouldn't go along with her advances. And so here, for being a man of integrity, he ends up in jail in Egypt, the worst possible, lowest of low, below being a slave. And yet he's so responsible. Next thing you know, that the head captain of the guard puts him in charge of other prisoners. And that's where he ends up interpreting two dreams. And one of the dreams has a positive interpretation that the cupbearer will be restored to his role versus the baker who's going to be executed. And he begs this cupbearer, please remember me when you get back in the good favor of Pharaoh. And then where we ended last week, we find out, well, the cupbearer, as soon as he got restored, forgot all about Joseph, and Joseph continued to languish in prison. So that's what we know about the Joseph narrative. What we ought to keep in mind as we go into our study tonight, we're going to cover a lot of material. But keep in mind, the oldest in the family was Reuben. He was born first, then Simeon, then Levi, and then Judah. Those are the four older brothers. There are some other brothers, but they're the only ones that play into the story that we're going to be talking about tonight. And we keep in mind, Reuben should have been the leader of the group, naturally being the firstborn, but he lost credibility with the family because he'd slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah, and disgraced his father and himself by that behavior. And then Simeon and Levi were the two brothers that led the outrageous killing of all the Shechemites because the king's son had defiled their sister Dinah, and Jacob was highly angry at them for that as well. And then, of course, Judah, the next in line, seems to have tried to exert some leadership. He's the one that came up with the idea of selling his brother into slavery. So none of these people are outstanding characters in high regard by their father, but they are the sons that he has and the brothers of Joseph. And so we pick up with the story of Joseph in chapter 41. John, if you want to read some of that for us.
When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gone ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning, his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dream, I saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain it to me." Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh that he is about what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I laid to Pharaoh. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance of Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because of the famine that follows it because of the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a 5th of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." Bruce, was dream interpretation during this time common in Egypt?
Yeah, it's interesting. We know from the writings of the Egyptians that just like our new president will have an economic advisor, the ancient Egyptians had dream interpreters. They even had a school called the House of Life, where young men were trained in the art of interpreting dreams, where they had volumes of books on past experiences and dreams and what different things might mean. So this was a common facet in the ancient world, as people, of course, were curious as to know what might be ahead, who could prognosticate what a dream might tell. And again, they believed that, when you dreamed, you were entering the unseen realm, and so they thought perhaps you could come back with some insights from that world. And as we see, God did use dreams. First of all, it's dreams of two in the Joseph story. He has the two dreams of his brother, and then his parents bowing down to him. Then there's the baker and the cupbearer, two dreams there. And now Pharaoh has two dreams. So they come in twos. And again, notice that Joseph says, look, it's not that I've got the skill to do this. Only God knows those things, but he had confidence that God could reveal that to him. So again, his interpretation is pretty straightforward. We talked a little bit about this before, but the entire economy of Egypt was dependent upon getting the right kind of plentiful rain that would bring down fertile soil and cover all the area in Egypt where they could plant the grain, and then from that they could feed the cattle and etc. And we do know from some excavations there, they found on the Nile an embankment where the priest of Egypt had marked how high the water had gotten in its full flood stage from year to year. And of course, some years it was way up at the top of the ladder, but there were some years it was at the very bottom. And so depending on this rain and whether it came at the appropriate time, they could be in a wonderful shape or disaster. Think about this way: Egypt is surrounded on both sides by desert. And the only thing that kept them from becoming a desert themselves was the Nile River that flowed through them, and then the soil that would be brought down and fertilize their soil year after year. So they were very dependent on that. And we do know that there were periods of time where, again, from their perspective, there was no prediction of that. They couldn't look to a meteorologist to give them a report. But here we find that God is revealing that there's going to be 7 real plentiful years followed by 7 years of famine. And, that would have been enough to perhaps destroy a Egyptian pharaoh his role was to keep Ma'at, which was order in the universe, so that there would be plenty of rain and the people would prosper. And so if they suffered severe famine for an undue period of time, that's when entire Egyptian dynasties came to an end. Sometimes they came to an end because they were invaded, but we know at least once or twice they came to an end because of bad economic conditions like we're talking about here, famine. So for a king to know that he's got a 14-year forecast of the future and that he can prepare for it would be a marvelous thing indeed. And of course, Joseph ends by suggesting you ought to put a wise person in charge of all this to make sure that during the plentiful years you're collecting as a kind of tax and put in reservoir, 20% of what you're collecting, so that you'll have the stock for the years of famine. So again, pretty simple, straightforward narrative. I think we're perhaps familiar with the story up to this point. But let's go ahead and continue reading the account. Verse 37.
Verse 37, the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zephanath Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping record because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt, there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. Bruce, what is the possibility of a Hebrew being placed in charge of Egyptians?
Yeah, it's interesting because there was clearly prejudice among the Egyptians, considered themselves a kind of superior people to all the Semitic people. One of the ways they distinguished themselves was the Egyptians usually shaved their bodies. And again, the idea here was to prevent any lice from accumulating in their hair, where typical Semite, a Hebrew like Joseph, would grow their hair long and never shave, perhaps. So you see, he had to clean himself up, shave, etc., before he even could appear before Pharaoh. But we do know from a number of inscriptions and names of officials that served under Pharaoh that they did have people from foreign lands, Hebrews, Semites, others that were of the same background that did serve in very high positions. You know, the Pharaoh was smart enough to know that if you had a really sharp person, no matter where they were from, that Egypt could benefit from, they would put them in high positions. So that's what he did. And we see, of course, he even gave him a wife of one of the priest families, which again, the priests were the next in line to most prominent in Egypt to Pharaoh and his family. And he had two kids, and we see from how he named them that he still felt some sorrow over what he'd experienced with his family by the naming of his first child. But by the birth of the second, he was focused more on how God had blessed him, and he had been successful and plentiful with his life. And so he named his second child that way. And so just as Joseph predicted it had happened, they stored grain beyond measure. And then, of course, when the famine hit, this became a way, look at it as a twofold thing. Pharaoh officially owned all the grain, and he sold it back to his own people as well as other people. So Pharaoh was not only providing the survival for his people and had an abundance even for others, but he's making money off of it, which of course would make a despot like a Pharaoh a very happy man. And so this is how Joseph was enriching and ingratiating himself to Pharaoh himself. And so again, as is often the case, famine in Egypt isn't just limited to Egypt, but it affected Palestine and other regions where we now find the family, of course, of Joseph were living, and they were suffering famine as well. So let's continue the narrative in chapter 42.
When Joseph learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he said to them, "you have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man, who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you, you are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. Now, Bruce, what may motivate Joseph to treat his brothers harshly?
Well, you can imagine this was not something probably he anticipated. And when his brothers show up, he recognizes them immediately. And no doubt, he flashes back to his last memories of these brothers are when they're negotiating over whether they're going to kill him or they're going to sell him into slavery. That can't exactly engender good feelings towards your family. So I'm sure that Joseph was angry. As far as Joseph knew, they might still be just as crooked. They claim to be honest men, but he's in a position of authority, so he brings the charge, which of course Egypt was always concerned about, that other people from less prosperous regions would come into their land and see how good things were, and then they'd go back and plan to come in and by military strength take over the land. Matter of fact, something like that took place about 1800 BC. We don't know whether that was before Joseph came there or not. And this is when a Semitic people came down and conquered Lower Egypt and ruled it for about 150 years. And then they were driven out by the Egyptians eventually, and they reestablished full rule. So this thing had happened in the past. And of course, the threat of that could happen at any time. The Cushite later conquered Egypt, which was a group further up the Nile from Egypt, and they ruled in Pharaoh's place for many years. So this was, sounded like a fairly legitimate kind of concern that Joseph was raising. But notice he said he did this to test his brothers. So he's trying to ascertain, had these brothers of mine grown in their moral character and integrity? Are they the same jealous bums that I last knew when they sold me into slavery? And so he's trying to devise a test for this. And so he comes up with the idea. Of course, this younger brother, Benjamin, his young brother he hadn't seen for all these years, he would, of course, like to see him again. And of course, this would also verify that they hadn't sold him into slavery or killed him off because he was no doubt Jacob's favorite in the absence of Joseph. But he was going to test to see how would the brothers negotiate all of this. And so initially he just throws them into jail. Irony, that's what had happened, of course, to Joseph, not for 3 days or a short period of time, but for a lengthy period of time, he had to exist in a jailed environment. So this is the testing of the brothers, and that's what we're going to see in the ensuing narrative. Go ahead, John, and we'll pick up where we left off.
Verse 18. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an account for his blood." They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of his sack. "My silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other, trembling, and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, "The man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men. We are not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan.' Then the man who is Lord over the land said to us, 'This is how I will know whether you are honest men.'" 1 second. Experiencing some technical difficulties. I beg your patience, everyone.
I can close it out while you're doing that if you want me to.
Thank you. Thank you.
By this, I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me and take grain for the famine of your households and go your way. Bring your youngest brother to me. Then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men. And I will deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade in the land. As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob, their brother, said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin? All this has come against me. Then Reuben said to his father, kill my two sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. But he said to him, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother's dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol.
And Bruce, here we see something remarkable. How did Joseph's brothers respond to the test he put them under?
Well, of course, they're speaking in their native tongue. They were not speaking Egyptian. They had an interpreter, and so they thought Joseph couldn't know what they were saying when they talked among themselves. But when they did, you see their guilt coming forth. They began to say, why are we in these straits? Why is this terrible situation occurring to us? Oh, it's because of what we did to our brother. So they allude to what they did to Joseph. Remember how he pleaded with us. And then for the first time, Joseph hears the oldest, Reuben, had actually sought to free him, and they hadn't listened to him. So that's the first time Joseph would have known of that. And so now with that information, he kind of changes his expectations. Instead of keeping all of them and sending one back to the father to bring back Benjamin, he's just going to keep one. And so he doesn't keep the oldest, Reuben. He goes one down to Simeon, because Reuben at least tried to save his life and save him from slavery. And so he holds Simeon, sends him the rest back to their father. And again, this is the test. You know, what if these brothers go back and say, boy, that's dangerous. We better not go back there again. Let's just let our brother Simeon die, whatever. He's expendable, but you know, we better go back and, you know, maybe we'll just tell our father a made up story and conceal what went on. Obviously, he's not going to send Benjamin back. So Joseph is testing him. What are they going to do? You know, will they deal with him straightforwardly, or will he not? Now, he knows something, Joseph, that the brothers don't know, and that is the famine's not over. And so they've gone down to Egypt thinking this could be a short-term famine. Maybe next year things will be back to normal. What they don't know is this is the beginning of years of famine. And so Joseph knows they're going to have to come back. And of course, you see, initially Jacob's response is very negative. He doesn't trust the brothers. You know, he's already lost one son that was dear to him. He's not going to risk it with Benjamin. He just says no flatly initially to their request of what, you know, the governor in Egypt has requested of them. And so he just leaves Simeon out to dry, still imprisoned back in Egypt. And so again, we see, unfortunately, Jacob hasn't learned his lesson not to show favoritism to certain sons. But what we're going to see is, are the brothers still jealous, or have they matured in their capacity to deal with that reality of family life? And that's where we continue on in the narrative.
Picking up in the next chapter, 43, verse 1. Now the famine was still severe in the land. So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said to him, "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.' If you will send our brother along with us, we will not go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.'" Israel asked, "Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?" They replied, "The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. 'Is your father still living?' he asked us. 'Do you have another brother?' We simply answered his questions. How were we to know? He would say, 'Bring your brother down here.'" Then Judah said to Israel, his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not you bring him back to you and set him here before you. I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice." Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be, then do this, but put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once. And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." So the men took the gifts and doubled the amount of silver, and Benjamin also. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. Now, what did Israel as a father decide should be done here, Bruce?
Well, it's interesting. Of course, we know initially he had a very negative reaction, but there's nothing like a famine that threatens the very existence of the entire family to sober up a father. And he realizes he really doesn't have any good alternative. He questions the kids. He's irritated at them that they brought up that they had a brother. They tried to explain to him why all this occurred. He very reluctantly finally agrees to it out of a sense of necessity. Judah now steps forward and tries to do what Reuben tried the first time, and his father wouldn't trust him, that he would take the responsibility on him to make sure that he would bring Benjamin back to him. And then, of course, Jacob's very smart, and he thinks, well, don't go down empty-handed. Let's bring some gifts to this one. Let's try to, this is the barter trade way that things were done in the ancient world. So maybe if we do that, we can show that, we're trying to get in his good graces, trying to cooperate with him. And so he gives a variety of kind of gifts that would not be common in Egypt, but that the Egyptians would seek from people that lived in Canaan. And so he sent those along with, he said, agree to pay them double because, for whatever reason, you got the money back that you paid the first time. So make sure you go back and do that. And so with that advice and that direction, Jacob reluctantly sent his son Benjamin along with the other brothers back to negotiate getting more food. And that's where the drama is heading as we continue to read the story.
Picking up at verse 16. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare a meal. They are to eat with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him and took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened when they were taken to his house. They thought, "We were brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys." So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance to the house. "We beg your pardon, our lord," they said. "We came down here the first time to buy food, but at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks and each of us found his silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of his sack. So we have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks." "It's all right," he said. "Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver." Then he brought Simeon out to them. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." Then they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out and controlling himself, said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. Bruce, what was this surprise response by Joseph designed to accomplish here?
Well, it's interesting. So this time he invites them to his house. Now you can see the paranoia of the brothers. They're thinking the worst possible thing. Oh, he's going to get us over there so he can overpower us and wants to steal everything from us, wants to make us slaves. Now, of course, that's kind of what they've done to their brother. But now they're afraid somebody's going to do the same thing to them. And again, they try to plead with his steward. Oh, here's the extra money we got back the last time. But then the steward reassures them, don't worry about it. Your God, the God of your fathers has blessed you with this, so you don't have to worry about that. And then we see again the cultural difference here. Egyptians don't eat with Hebrews, so segregated eating. So it's not just, that didn't happen just one time in our world, but it's happened over time. So Egyptians would not eat with Hebrews, so they were eating separately from one another. And of course, when Joseph sees his younger brother, he's overcome with emotion and has to go off and kind of cry by himself and straighten himself back up. Because again, Joseph's still not absolutely sure what kind of men am I dealing with my brothers. Now, Benjamin is an innocent younger brother, but what about these other men that so quickly sold me into slavery? And so he's still going to test their character over time. And that's kind of, I think, what's going on in all this drama. And so initially he treats them very well, but notice he gives extra food and things to Benjamin. So again, if your younger brother is treated special and better, are you going to be jealous of him? What's your attitude going to be towards Benjamin? And so he's setting them up to see what they're going to do when he takes them to the next stage of his test of their character.
Chapter 44. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house: fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for his divination? This is a wicked thing you have done.' When he caught up with them, he repeated these words to them. But they said to him, 'Why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we still steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves.' 'Very well, then,' he said, 'let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame.' Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this, they tore their clothes. Then they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, 'What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination?' 'What can we say to my Lord?' Judah replied. 'What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my Lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup.' But Joseph said, 'Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace.'" This last test that Joseph laid on his brothers, what did that reveal, Bruce?
Well, he's trying to set up a situation where it'll appear reasonable to his brothers that he suddenly decides, well, look, my gold silver cup, I think it's silver cup, has been found in the Benjamin's sack of grain. So therefore, I'll be justified in holding him. Notice they made rash statements when the servant of Joseph caught up with him. "Oh, there's no way we could be guilty of this. You know, you could just kill whoever did that if that happens, make the rest of us slaves." And then they discover it and they don't know what to say. And so, again, the question becomes, the servant is going to bring Benjamin back. So what are these brothers going to do? Are they going to run for the hills? And Joseph gives, even though they return, that was a good sign. Joseph gives them an out. You know, you can all go home free and just leave this one younger brother, because he had the silver cup, leave him here as my slave, and you go on your way. So the test is going to be, are they going to do to Benjamin what they did to Joseph? Allow him to be, in effect, sold into slavery, and especially in this case, keep their own lives free, go on their way, explain the sad story to their father, but they've survived this terrible test. And so they don't realize exactly what's going on. And what's going to be interesting is that we have one of the longest speeches in Genesis that comes up next, as out of the brothers, it turns up that Judah, the very one that planned to sell Joseph into slavery and convince the other brothers, who seems to have become a leader among the brothers as he vouchsafed the safety of Benjamin to his father, he's now going to step up to the plate, and lots going to depend on what he does and says. And that's what the rest of the chapter tells us.
Verse 18, then Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord." Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servant, do you have a father or brother? And we answered, we have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of my mother's sons left, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me so I can see him for myself. And we said to my Lord, the boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die. But you told your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what my Lord had said. Then our father said, go back and buy a little more food. But we said, we cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, he has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now, if the boy is not with us, when I go back to your servant, my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please, let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. Now, Bruce, how does Judah, the betrayer of Joseph, restore his moral integrity?
Well, he shows that he's willing to take Benjamin's place and make himself a slave, not knowing what that would be, but that was not going to be a good outcome for him, in order to free his younger brother, who was under accusation because the silver cup of Joseph had been found in his sack. And we see he makes a very impassioned plea. And in it, you see that he's willing to take responsibility. You see in it that he really cares about his father, that he may have learned a severe lesson at the thought of Jacob that his brother Joseph had been killed by wild animals. What distraught situation that had brought on his father. And he said, this will kill him if this news comes back. Well, if he was still being selfish, he'd say, well, you know, dad dies and we'll inherit the farm. And so what? And so this was really a test of his character, and Judah showed himself no longer to be a betrayer, but instead a stand-up man of integrity that was willing to sacrifice his best interest for the sake of his young brother, and for the sake of his father. And I think in all this, we've seen something that I think is very important, and that is test. None of us like to go through hardship and difficulty, but oftentimes these are the things that develop our character. We see Joseph at the beginning of the story seem to be a somewhat spoiled kid telling his dreams, but as time goes on, he shows himself to be increasing a man of wisdom and integrity through his heartaches, losses, and hardships. And so now we see that the years have, through their challenges, have developed the character of Judah and the other brothers from where they were back when they were willing to sell a brother into slavery. And I think it'd be a good place to end by just noting the book of James. James chapter 1. I don't know whether you have that You have to read that for us, John.
Beginning at verse 2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything.
Yeah. So instead of taking the attitude of bemoaning the trials, by the way, the Greek word here, trials, it's the same word for test. The trials of life or tests of our character. Some people become better through tests, some become bitter. It's not a given what you'll become, but if we take a joyful approach to the challenges of life, recognizing even the worst trials and tests can accomplish good, because if nothing else, it produces a steadfastness, an ability to keep on keeping on, to not just do the right thing until it's difficult, but be able to persevere in doing the right thing. Oftentimes it takes trials and tests in order to make us mature, lacking in nothing. And so James's insight perhaps goes back to Joseph and his brothers, as well as other Old Testament examples of how character is developed through hardship and trials. And so as we look at our own lives, sometimes we may have gone through a spiral downward like Joseph did initially, or we may be going through unique challenges now in our life that we haven't had to go through before. And we can approach them one of two ways. We can bemoan our situation and complain, which doesn't really help us or anyone else. We can, on the contrast, choose to meet the challenges of life with joy, realizing that God can make these things work for our good, and trusting, as Joseph had, in the omnipotence and care and compassion of God. I pray that that will be our choice as we face the challenges of life, and hopefully that'll be one lesson we learn from the story and narrative about Joseph. John, you want to close us out with a word of prayer?
Yes. So thank you, Bruce. Let us pray. Father, we are humbled that you have given us the complete works of your holy and divine word, that we can learn about you and examples of what it is to be full of integrity and to endure tests and to grow and be developed and matured thereby. We thank you for Bruce and his ability to share these insights into your holy word. And we're so grateful that we are being developed and mentored by these studies. Bless us, keep us, and guide us until the next time we meet. In Jesus' name we ask this prayer. Amen.
Amen.